So we are just about done with this chapter. This is your review. You're going to do this a little bit differently. I will attach a worksheet. And so on your Google worksheet, um, you're going to just have to enter the answers to the questions, but you'll have to look at another sheet and jot your answers down on a separate sheet of paper. But just to review, remember SOHCAHTOA is what we're working with, and we use sine, cosine, and tangent to find both sides and angles of a triangle. So remember, the sine of the angle, whatever it is, I'll call it x, is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. The cosine of the angle is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the tangent of the angle is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. So those are what the abbreviation SOHCAHTOA stands for. When you look at a triangle, remember, depending on the way it is shaped, wherever your angle is that you're looking for, so if I'm looking for x, or if I know what x is, across from that is always the opposite side. Across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse, and the remaining side is always the adjacent. Now, if I flip this triangle over, remember that the opposite and the adjacent and the hypotenuse are going to change their position. But these are things that are important to remember. This is something that you may want to take a screenshot of or write down or make sure you know. But again, what we did is we did three different things. We set up sine, cosine, and tangent. We solved for a missing side, and we solved for a missing angle. When you take your test on Thursday, that's what you're going to have to be able to take care of. Okay, you're going to have to be able to set up sine, cosine, or tangent. You're going to have to be able to solve for a side and solve for an angle. So I'm going to do an example of each of those. So for example 1, if I want to find the given trig function, find the sine of x, for instance. So I'll be given a right triangle, and my right triangle will have some labels like maybe x, y, and z. And then it will also have some sides measured. And so let's say this one is 6, and this side is 8, and this side is 10. And I know that this is a right triangle because of the Pythagorean theorem. 6 squared plus 8 squared is equal to 10 squared, but that's not what we're looking at right now. If I want to find the sine of x, here's x. This is the x that I'm looking at. Opposite. Remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And so I would go from x, the opposite side. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. The remaining side is the adjacent, but because I'm looking for sine, I want opposite over hypotenuse. So this would equal 6 over 10. If I can reduce it, I reduce it. I can divide the top and the bottom by 2, so that's 3 over 5. So that would be my solution for that one. Another thing that we're going to have to do, or that you're going to have to do, is, like I said, find a missing side. So let's say I know, I'm going to draw my right triangle a little bit different this time. Let's say I know this angle down here is, I'm going to call it 50, and I want to figure out what the hypotenuse is, and I know let's say I know the adjacent side, so this is going to be 13, okay? So I'm looking for this missing value, and again, I'm going to use that SOHCAHTOA again. Across from 50 is the opposite. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. The remaining side is the adjacent. So I have to think about what I have. The things that are labeled are the adjacent and the hypotenuse, so I must use cosine, because that's what the cosine is. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So I do the cosine of 50 is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And remember, I did remind you when we were working on this, where x is important. If x is in the top, I'm going to multiply. If x is in the bottom of the fraction, I'm going to divide. So that was something we talked about before. If x is in the top, you're going to multiply the two numbers that are here. I'm going to do 13 times the cosine of 50. It's x is in the bottom. I have to divide the two numbers that are here. And because x is in the bottom, this one is a divide. So top, x on top, multiply. X on the bottom, divide. Again, something else that you might want to jot down. This is an important thing to remember. Some people keep sending me things like, oh, it's so complicated, I don't get it. Just take your time and set it up. The problems are all the same. It's just a matter of if you're going to be using sine, cosine, or tangent. So I'm going to pull out my calculator and do this one because I've got my setup. I've got x in the bottom, so I'm going to have to divide. Remember, if you use your phone, that's fine. So I'm going to do 13 divided by, and I have to go into my extra screen. Again, some of you guys tip your phone. This is the cosine of 50. I will close that parenthesis and then hit equals. And so my x is roughly 20.2. So that would be my final answer for that one. Okay, so that's the type of thing that you're going to have to do. You're just going to have to remember once you set it up, draw the same. Notice how I drew the same kind of picture here and labeled everything opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse, always the same. So the last type of problem that you're going to get is if you're going to find the angle. So I'm going to draw my, again, move this around a little bit differently. Let's say I am interested in finding this angle right here. That's going to be my question mark angle. That's what I'm interested in. And maybe I have these sides labeled as 14 and 15. Okay, so again, I'm going to look at the picture. This is the angle I'm interested in. Across from that is the opposite. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. So I'm doing the same thing every time I see. The remaining side is the adjacent. I look at what's labeled. I have the opposite and the adjacent. I don't have the hypotenuse. Which one uses opposite and adjacent? And so then that's tangent. So when I set this up, the tangent of the angle that I'm looking for is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. Now this, when I was looking for an angle, I had to use something different on my calculator. And depending on the calculator that you use, mine uses the inverse key. Yours might use a second key or a shift key, or if you're using a regular standard calculator, it'll be written above your sine, cosine, and tangent. But when I'm plugging this in the calculator, to get this, I have to do the tangent inverse of 14 divided by 15 to get my angle. Because I don't know the angle, I have to use that special shift. So I do shift, and then my tangent inverse shows up. So I select that with the little -1. And then I'll go back and do my 14 divided by 15 and hit equals. And it looks like my x is roughly 43 degrees. Okay, so again, this is what you need to know for your test on Thursday. Your test on Thursday is going to cover these 3 topics. So you're going to have a little review worksheet, and on that worksheet, I'm gonna give you a link to the worksheet, and then what I want you to do is to write down what your answers are, and then you can enter your answers on your Google form. As always, if you have any questions, just let me know. Have a great day.